All right.
We had,
Can everyone hear me okay if I speak normally? Okay,
yeah,
great.
so there was a lot of.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started.
Down, and then we had a recovery message too.
So, all right, welcome everyone. My name is Jesse Dyck. I am a solutions architect at Evolving Web. And just before I get too much into it, a quick introduction of who Evolving Web is. You heard a little bit from Alex earlier, but we are a full-service digital agency. We work with a lot of higher education clients, including, of course, our lovely hosts here at Princeton, and a lot of other clients. This is only a small amount of them. And we do a lot of course, Drupal work. So, before I get into the meat of my talk, a couple of disclaimers. Number one, I might cough a couple of times. I've had this nagging cough since a cold like a month ago. It just doesn't go away. I apologize for that. This is a new talk that's based on a couple of discussions I've had, a few things that I've been thinking about. I might get a little opinionated, but really what I'm after is kind of triggering some thoughts and maybe some discussions afterwards. So definitely welcome you to talk to me after, and I would love to keep talking about this. So I'm actually going to tell you what my sort of key takeaway is right at the beginning, and that is that we as agencies, as site builders, as designers and developers, and even content editors, we all need to start thinking a bit more about how we build content editing experiences. We have this great moment now where Experience Builder is on the horizon. Other page builders have been available, and I think we really need to start thinking more and more about that as a part of the process. I think it's important to make sure that content editing teams can pop into their website, make some updates, and move on with their day and not worry about things fighting against them. So before I get into that, a bit of a scenario. I think maybe some people might be familiar with this as well. We actually had this last night. I was going to use another example, but this came up last night. We got in at a little bit late into Princeton last night and went off for dinner, and then afterwards decided we wanted to go to the grocery store and get some food for the Airbnb. And it was a little bit late already, so we looked up a grocery store on Google Maps and found one nearby, and supposedly it was open. So we decided we're going to go there, and by the time we get there, of course, we realize it's closed. Google Maps didn't know that. And I bet you if you looked on their website, also wouldn't be updated. But I bet you if they had an Instagram account, that would have been updated. Be it just like the hours in their like description or a post about why they were closed that one time. And that happens a lot actually, like on like a holiday Monday or something if you're looking up opening hours. Most of these businesses do have their own website, but for some reason they always turn to other platforms to update that content and not their own website. And my thinking is that websites are just still too difficult to update. And when a small business needs to make this one little change, they're going to turn to the platform that they probably use the most, and that's Instagram or something else, some other social network. And so if they can't do it, how do we expect like our large content editing teams with 40 components and thousands of pages to be able to make really simple updates? I think it really doesn't have to be that way, and I think that's where those of us that are building websites, be that designers or developers or even the content editors, can really help to do that. So that's kind of the premise of what I want to get into today. And more specifically, I want to talk about WYSIWYG editors. Maybe some people remember Microsoft Front Page. That was actually maybe the original WYSIWYG. That is true to the what you see is what you get. But even more specifically, I think maybe this is obvious, but I want to talk about page builders. How we have this new ability in the open source CMS world to have these page builders and even full theme builders in a very visual way, and how that can maybe help us with some of these problems and start maybe discussing some solutions. First, I've used a couple of terms that maybe not everybody is aware of, so I want to go through a couple of definitions about what I mean when I say these things. So WYSIWYG is what you see is what you get, and that is that it's kind of self-explanatory. It's that idea that you should be able to update a website and do it in the way that you're seeing what you're updating visually right in real time, without like a preview mode or a refresh or anything like that. I'm going to talk a lot about page builders, and these are kind of some of the examples of what I mean when I'm talking about those. There's, of course, the very exciting up-and-coming experience builder. This is a shot from their public Figma, just designs of it. The actual demo is coming along. You can play with it and start using it. It is still very early days, but we'll see where that goes. Wix and Squarespace and Webflow and all those other solutions that have their own nice page builders built in make it easier to update content. In the rest of the open source CMS world, we have things like Elementor, of course, if anyone's familiar with that from the WordPress world, and the WordPress block editor. These are kind of more what I do consider WYSIWYG editors, where you're truly editing the content that everybody sees, and you're seeing it in, hopefully, as close to the same way as somebody will see it on the website. So it's that real, won't call it a preview mode, because it is just you're editing what somebody will see. We also have text editors, the CK editor, the tiny MCE. Sometimes we refer to those as WYSIWYG editors, which I've never really liked that idea, because that really truly isn't what you see is what you get. What we're seeing here is, of course, a lot of red lorem ipsum, but you're seeing just a text field. You don't see how that's styled on the front end. There are ways to improve on that, of course, but typically this is what you might see on a lot of websites. And we have sort of legacy, or maybe even more like current. If we think about like next generation as page builders, we have more of the legacy builders, things like paragraphs, or from WordPress, the ACF has like a very similar system for very similar to paragraphs. We have layout builder that is maybe more of an intermediary in there, but not quite the experience builder that we're all looking forward to. And so I'm going to focus a lot more on the core page builders, the experience builder, the WordPress block editor, those things. I see those as being the modern sort of page builders, the modern ways of making websites. I think what's unique about these, they are closer to real WYSIWYG editors, but I think what's really important is they're built into core. They're built into, or will be built into, a core open source CMS that we can all download and use in a non-proprietary way. I think that's incredibly important. I think this represents like a really good, important shift in the sort of CMS landscape, in our open source especially CMS landscape, to sort of compete with the likes of Wix and Webflows and all of those that have sort of been maybe taking some marketplace from some areas of the market, especially in our space, in the higher ed and enterprise and larger organizations. I think where we have literal teams of content editors, I think these are incredibly important to help support the CMS and the growth. So I think I've mentioned sort of a problem or issues or something a couple of times. So I'll get into sort of what maybe I see that as being. I showed this already. This is a CK editor. It's we sometimes call it a WYSIWYG editor, but as I said, I'm not a huge fan of that. I don't think it's truly there. It's quite simple. It's basically a text editor. We have experiences like this. This is layout builder, and sort of an empty sort of setup. Still a little bit not incredibly user friendly. I think we know that. We're looking towards a replacement at this point. Then we have systems like this. This is in a WordPress website where we have what is more or less just a lot of paragraphs, a lot of fields again. So it's not really, in my opinion, these aren't really WYSIWYG editors. This isn't really what you see on the front end when you make changes to it. If I were to try to build an acronym for that, it's something more like what you see is what fills in the content on the front end, but whatever. It's an overwhelming acronym. Like it's not a WYSIWYG.
That's funny.
And if we look at like an actual WYSIWYG editor, we can start to see something more like this. Also, kind of overwhelming, right? Like there's a lot of different options in there. We have a whole bunch of colors that don't feel like they're coherent. We can even add custom colors in there. We have margin controls to maybe change the spacing in between paragraphs. Do we really want content teams to be thinking about their margins when they're adding in a new component? And look at all those embed options on the left side from all the different services. This is WordPress default. So this is kind of getting to now the crux of the problem, perhaps. We do have, I want to bring back Experience Builder at a larger screen here. You know, it's starting to look really good. We have a lot of work to go on that, but it's really up and coming. It's going to be great, and hopefully, you know, give us some of these same controls that I'm going to talk about. But it is still early days. So I want to come back to WordPress and how we sort of customize that a little bit. If we look for a more curated option, now we see there's a lot less options on that right sidebar. And this is for like a header, just adding a header to a website. We can see, you know, we have really no controls with some advanced options and some visibility controls. So that's kind of the problem and the solution, I guess, there is that we can, with these modern tools, start to build what the site builders can make an easier content editing experience. But I think it's only if someone is actually thinking about that and advocating for that. I think unless someone's doing that, it's really not going to end up happening. So that's why I think that we all, as website builders, whether that be designers or developers or content editors or anybody really, can start to help with that. But I think, again, the problem is no one's intentionally doing that today. And it might be because we're not aware that we have to. Maybe we're not aware that nobody else is doing it. If there are places, of course there are places where someone is doing that, and that's great. But I think it's not really, you know, talked about as much. It's often overlooked. So I think we can all start to advocate a lot more for that and start to see who can do that. And I don't think we need like a new role for this. We don't need to have like we have like UX designers. We don't need a content editing experience designer. But we just need someone who is maybe more responsible and starts trying to talk about these things. So how? I think that's the big question. And so I'm coming a little more from the WordPress experience. I think maybe that's obvious. The WordPress community. So I want to share a couple of things that I've learned and what I've been thinking about with all of this. So I want to talk about what I think developers can do, because I come from more of a development experience, and give a little bit of thoughts and advice about what I think designers and content editors can do as well to help with some of these. So first of all, I think it's important that we do embrace these tools. I think that if we look at what we've done in what we've seen in the WordPress community, we try some of these intermediary technologies that tries to bring us the familiar pieces from the past and place them into what we see now. The community has developed some of these tools, and it doesn't really create for a great experience for content editors. We still have these sets of fields. It just looks a lot like paragraphs, but just slightly different now. And it's really foreign concept once you get familiar with the experience to have these types of components mixed in with this really rich editing experience. It's really quite frustrating and doesn't meld well with the intention and the rest of the ecosystem, and it's probably not going to last for a 5 to 7 to 10 year website. That a lot of times is what you're looking at that investment for a new website. And we do that because it brings us back to our familiar working space, and this code doesn't actually matter. It's just a bunch of PHP code, but it's how we can register a new block in WordPress if we use some of these other tools. Versus if we wanted to build something that is more native and functioning within WordPress, we do have to turn to another language. We have to turn to React, which is also a technology that Experience Builder is going to be built on. It does mean embracing something new. It might be frustrating. It might take learning something new. It might expose issues with that system. But I think as long as the momentum continues with that system, the investment in it, the investment in Experience Builder and in the WordPress block editor, I think that investment for all of us to learn it, I think, is going to pay off. Again, the code is not important. It's the fact that it takes a shift to develop something new in these new systems. And I showed a little bit of this earlier, but we can start to really curate that user experience, the editing experience rather, and making it much more simple, paring it back into what we need. So if I go back to that previous example, WordPress provides a lot of these things by default, but we can, and actually Experience Builder will have its own set of like default components that you can add or you can remove. And so we can really work with the platform and start removing those things So all of these confusing options with that whole list of blocks. And we even have the ability to, if we search for a block that we think is there, if it's not there, we can install it right from here. So that means like infinite flexibility, infinite blocks, but it's also infinite opportunities to create more confusion and non-branded pieces and inaccessible content and whatnot. And if anybody saw, Suzanne mentioned earlier as well, the patterns that WordPress provides by default. And she actually, I think, mentioned them as a good thing because it provides a way for you to start without a blank page and to add some content right in there, start building it right away. And that's great. But and that helps with some sites. But with other sites, you really don't want these because if someone dropped those into any one of our higher education websites, it's not going to look on brand, it's not going to look great on that site. So we can start to disable these types of things. And in the editing experience, people have quite a bit of power, but with that comes, of course, great responsibility. We can create these very inaccessible color combinations, really inconsistent spacing, off-brand websites, just incredibly all-around broken, I would say, design experiences on the website, and we probably don't want that. And in Drupal, we're not used to all that flexibility just yet. We are used to more structured, controlled content types and a controlled experience, and that's great. That's what supports the websites that we build. But I think we're at that point now where a lot of content editors are wanting more flexibility. Even when we do start to get into a more customizable experience, even our blocks in a layout builder setup have all of these rigid fields. So we're hoping to get to that point where we can have that maybe more of a middle ground between that incredibly customizable experience and that really rigid experience. So to go back to my WordPress example, we have a heading on a site here, and we can control the different options that are on the side there. Now somebody could create, again, inaccessible content. They could add different text colors. They could even change the font family that's being used for this heading to go completely off-brand. But we can also, with a couple of lines of code, pare that back quite a bit to only display the options that we need on this. And that way, the component that was dropped on the page looks great by default because we've designed it, we've built it that way. But now, somebody can use it wherever they want and not have to worry about all the additional load to decide the margins, to decide the colors, to do all that. They just get the component as designed and it looks great.
Is that WordPress or Experience Builder?
This is WordPress.
WordPress.
Yeah, and so the takeaway there is just to be able to customize those controls to pare it back a little bit to the things that are needed for each individual website. Experience Builder, WordPress, even Webflow, they all provide a lot of options that we can start to really pare back. I kind of struggle with this one a little bit, but I think it is important to talk about who should be responsible for some of this, for the content editing experience, basically. I don't know who that is just yet, but if we go back to some of these other examples, this is kind of what happens, I think, when we leave it up to developers. We end up with a lot of fields, rigid structure, because we're developers. I think that's actually very normal. We're thinking about our content model, we're thinking about our fields, we're thinking about control over the data and the markup. That's pretty normal. But what we're not thinking about is how users interact with the system, or how they are, or we're just trying to optimize for the system, basically. But maybe designers, on the other hand, they're used to designing in full creativity, but also thinking about the user experience and building, having that empathy for people that are using these systems. So they'd be great people to be having an input into this content editing experience and how that works. Project managers and product owners would also be great advocates because they're working on behalf of their clients and especially as they're crafting the user stories. But they don't always have the experience in the CMS to really know how flexible it is, how to customize it, what to do in there. And I should apologize. I know product managers and product owners aren't only doing user stories, but it seems like an appropriate analogy. Kind of my point, though, is that I think everybody can be a part of this. Everybody can help improve the content editing experience and make it an easier experience for everybody. But in that case, who's sort of responsible for it? Who's the one that's actually at the end of the day going to be, saying yes or no, or has the power to do so? I don't really know who that is just yet. I don't know if, in the accessibility world, we have accessibility specialists. I don't know if we need a sort of a similar designation or something. I think it is well suited more in the front end developer role, because they have maybe an eye in design and an eye on the front end and in the code and whatnot. But I think it's ultimately something that we need to maybe be talking about and considering a little bit more, as who maybe should be on the team that is specializing in some of this and has some of that focus. Maybe it is something that some people want to decide to focus on just because they feel it's important. But I think the other point was that collaboration, I think, is incredibly important, because we have so many different perspectives in an agency, in these organizations, between designers and developers and everybody else. So I'll talk a little bit about what I think maybe designers can do, and I'll preface that with, of course, I'm a developer giving some advice to designers. I think, for the designers in the crowd, some things that we can start thinking about is user research with the content editors and how they're using the CMS. I know that happens sometimes, but probably not as often as it could. I think we'd get a lot from observing how they're using the CMS and improving based on that. And not just the CMS that they're coming from, but the new CMS that we built for them. I think it's important to be involved in building that editor experience as well. I think there's a lot that can be learned for everybody to have a say in that and start to really just observe it again and figure out how it works, but more importantly, be involved in the process of building it, and then just using it. I think it would be great to see the designers. They've designed these components, actually using them in the CMS, maybe creating a component library in the CMS or component inventory, basically like a page that has all the components. They can interact with it and see maybe where it should be changed or what they can learn from using it in those areas. And then for the content editors, I think there's a lot of opportunities to provide feedback that maybe it's just a matter of sort of knowing about, advocating for the simplicity of limiting unnecessary blocks and settings and options, and especially during demos. Maybe it's a sprint demo or something. It's a great opportunity to provide some feedback and use the CMS and provide options. And again, I think knowing the fact that we have that ability to customize some of these pieces is really what can help to give you that insight into knowing the availability of customizing that, just being aware of that ability, and then ensuring that the editor aligns with your brand and accessibility standards, so that you know that you can only select the colors that you should be and the combinations that you should be able to. I think it is important, if you're not seeing demos, if you're only seeing demos on the front end of your new website, ask for that demos on the back end as well to see how that's working. Ask for resources like content entry guides and videos and all of those things that can help you to really understand how it's supposed to work, and then decide how you want it to work. So I guess what now? What's next? What's my kind of point in all of this? And I think it's really just about we need to start building websites for content editors too, especially when we're talking about these large websites that are supposed to last 5 to 7 years, that are going to cost a lot of money, that are massive investments. And I think that I mentioned earlier this sort of like moment where now we have 2 major open source CMSs that are going to have these built-in page builders. I think it's a great opportunity for the web in general to be able to ensure that there's this, like, I think we all probably in the open source community want this, free and open web kind of thing, and then we might shudder a little bit when we see the proprietary tools starting to take some of the market share. I think this is a great opportunity to ensure that we as the site builders are building websites that will make sense for the users to use, and won't leave them with a bad sort of taste in their mouth, bad experience that will turn them back to the proprietary tools. So I think the key takeaway is to explore these new page builders, to embrace them, to test them and play with them and kind of understand them, maybe create like a ephemeral site, like maybe for an upcoming event or something, to try it out and get familiar with them, so that we can make sure that we know how to make these tools better for the other people that are using them on the other end. So that's what I had to say about my topic. I did want to just quickly mention, we mentioned it a couple of times today, but our upcoming Evolve Drupal summit in Boston coming up on June 6th. EvolveDrupal.com has a bunch more information about that. And yeah, that's all from me. So I wonder if anyone has any questions or even just thoughts or discussion points. First question from Marianne.
Yeah, actually I have a question. I agree that the content editor's experience is very valuable. Like those people use websites that we design on a daily basis, and having their knowledge to build, migrate website or build new website is very valuable. Now this would take time and therefore money.
Mm-hmm.
And you said that building websites costs money already. So how could we convince clients to invest that time? Because the way they could see it is that it's not going to impact my end users. Like they are going to see that exactly the same website in the end. So how could we convince clients to invest that time so their content editors could have a better way, a better experience in creating the content that is going to be displayed on the site?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was basically how can we convince people paying for websites to put the investment in to make the content and the experience better. That's always a hard one. I think that we can do that by showing benefits. If we have some of these, I could have gone much deeper into some of the examples of like how maybe using real world examples of how content can be made inaccessible, which has could be given a dollar figure to that as well if they were to get audited or something. So showing the investments, how you can sort of like potentially save money by putting this little investment in. There's also maybe an investment in the time. Somebody might have to, if you're given more options, you just have more decisions to make. So it takes more time to consider all that. So, if that's why someone's not updating those opening hours on their website when they, because of, they just don't want to spend the time to update it because the editing experience is too confusing, too complex. I think showing a lot of the benefits would be the first place that I would look to. But I don't actually know. That is definitely something that's challenging. I think that we probably struggle with that too, to find the ability to spend the time and budget on doing some of those enhancements. Doing user research on a new website and the content editing experience would probably be quite low on the list of things to do. So I think that would be very expensive and tough to find that budget. Maybe even just having a good set of like defaults that we build a lot of higher education websites. Maybe we know what our clients want, and we can just have a good set of defaults pre-made to put out there, and not have to spend all that time for each client. It's a tough one. I don't know exactly how to answer that. But.
Well, it's the notion of investing once to keep reaping those benefits.
Yeah.
Put the effort in up front, and like you say, people will save time every time they have to edit the website or whatever, or they'll be more willing to, and it'll pay itself off over time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Dan, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention quick, if anyone is doing WordPress development, that it's way easier to use ACF Pro to program little blocks than the React approach that they sort of recommend by default or whatever. It's just using ACF Pro, you can just write little PHP snippets, and I found it way easier than the React stuff. I just want to plug that if anyone's in that world.
Yeah, and just to repeat that it's easier to use in WordPress to use ACF, Advanced Custom Fields Pro, to build blocks than it is to make React-based blocks. And maybe just to respond to that's a great point, and like we do that as well because it is easier. It does save time, but it goes back to that same idea of like, you know, if we invest a little bit more and make React blocks, they seem to function better within the ecosystem, especially when they're next to other blocks, other components that we've created or patterns that we've created. So that kind of goes to the idea of embracing the system as it's designed and maybe not looking for like a intermediary system. I think of ACF blocks as being kind of an intermediary system. So I think it doesn't create the best experience. I think it existed for a reason, but I like to try to push to move away from that a little bit, fully acknowledging that it has its benefits too.
Just question, in terms of the experience builder for Drupal, do you think they're going to be try to match WordPress site builder currently, Gutenberg or whatever they use now?
Yeah, so the question was if Experience Builder will match Gutenberg and the WordPress platform.
Yeah, in terms of simplicity and ease of use for content editors.
Yeah, I think that's the goal. I wouldn't say match in the sense that like I in the process of building this, I played with it a lot, as much as I could. You know, it's still very early, so there's definitely some bugs. But I play with it a lot, and it is looking great. It's really exciting. It's really like feeling native to Drupal, which I think is incredibly important too. I don't think that that was was the intentional decision not to match Gutenberg, because Gutenberg exists for Drupal as well. But it was intentional to be more native to Drupal, which I think is great. So I don't think it'll match it in the same way, but in the sense, at a high level, in the sense that you can build a site theme and your pages and everything very visually, I think it will, at a high level, match that.
Yeah.
And that's where some of the risks of like how much control is provided, how much flexibility versus a more curated experience. Yeah. Alex?
How much time do we have? We have 2 minutes for me to speak. Okay, good.
Plenty of time.
So I found this talk to be really exciting, actually, and even though I got a demo of Experience Builder 2 weeks ago at Drupal Camp Florida, after Lori's presentation, he kind of ran me through it. And it's pretty amazing, actually, and I think it's better than anything I've seen. I actually talked to Dries, and I'm sure many other people did, and I said, look at Webflow. Like, anything we have in Drupal is not competitive. I think even WordPress is not competitive. People, designers all live in Figma, and they're used to this power of Figma, and they're looking for something similar, and you have to build a no-code solution that has similar power. And of course, you have to, at the same time, be able to lock it down for content teams, like Jesse pointed out. So it's a very ambitious project. My only concern about it isn't how awesome it's going to be, but how long it's going to take, because of how much more ambitious it ended up being. That said, some of the best people in the Drupal community are working on it. I mean, I think that's become the #1 mission. People talk about Drupal CMS as the big Acquia and Drupal community initiative, but I think this is really the biggest part of the effort is there. So exciting times, but we'll see what they promised something by the summer, an early version, and maybe a launch in September. I think that's still optimistic, but like it already functions. The other exciting thing about it is that it's moving the front-end logic to JavaScript, where all the developers want to be. No one wants to be writing twigs if you're like in your 20s at all. And we actually have taken over some failed projects, and it's been very tough when people wrote a mapping layer between Drupal theming and Twig. And like all of the CSS is written on JS templates and this monster module to try to be an alternative theming layer to glue them together. And these guys are not core Drupal developers and some of the best of the best. They were just like an agency. So I'm sure a lot of people tried this approach and failed. So it's so exciting to see the Drupal community answer that. I know Matt Hand had a great talk at Drupal, Evolve Drupal New York about web components, which is a similar sort of concept. So, very exciting times. The second thing I wanted to mention, Jesse said, sensible defaults. One of the key parts of Drupal CMS is the recipes module, which is little snippets of configuration that instead of installing like a Drupal module that gives you functionality, you click to apply it. And it's almost like replaying a macro, and then you can do whatever you want. It's like hiring Jesse to come in, click around your site for a while and change a lot of settings and hand it over back to you. So I think that's going to allow people to contribute and then replay these defaults and for different use cases. My third point is I think it's important to know that for different scenarios, you want different tools and different workflows. For example, for our Evolve Drupal site, which has like 4 landing pages and section pages, we don't want no developers involved. We want no content people involved. There's no content team, there's no revisions, there's no, the only person editing this site, there's 2. There's our sort of community coordinator and events person, Maya, who's highly trainable and very, very adept, who can make any edits to any text instantly. But most of the work is being done by our designer, Joe. And Joe's super smart, super technical, but he's a designer. And because Webflow is so similar to Figma, he can basically say, oh, I learned Webflow in a couple of days to get basic comfort, and now I can make most things I could do in Figma, I can do about the same time in Webflow. So for that use case, how amazing is Webflow, and how inappropriate is Drupal with its developers and project managers and QAs and deployments. But on the other hand, when you have a larger content team, it's not at all appropriate. So, which is why it's exciting to see these conversations. And my final point is that there's a book that was on Kickstarter and recently came out by Greg Dunlap, who's a long-time member of the Drupal community, still is, and it's called Designing Content Editing Experiences. And it's basically like a book-length version of all of this. He spent 12 years almost at Lullabot, now he's at Bixel, so it's really a Drupal background, but on the other hand, it's not a book about Drupal, it's a book about the holistic thing, and it goes into all of the parts, not just the what you see is what you get and make it intuitive to make pages, but also the whole information architecture, the user testing for your content team, the dashboards, all of those like little things like accessibility, search, related content, so and cognitive load, and so all of these things are part of this content editing experience beyond just experience building. So it's very exciting that very smart people are looking at it.
Thank you. I won't try to repeat all that for the recording, unfortunately.
Just to add,
Yes, Matt.
well, I just wanted to point out your slides about incorporating like content authors in demos better, and it's something that my team, like last year, we were struggling on, and to the point where it felt like the content authors might be unionizing soon. So this time this year, it's a much better situation. They're very happy. But it all started with the demos and calling out user interface changes specifically for content authors, which sometimes is a challenge when you're relying on a plugin, and it updates and it changes a word on a button, or it changes where that button is. Like, we're getting much better at catching that and informing the content authors that, oh, we adjusted our documentation here, this is the new workflow. So I think that call out was actually a really big one to pay attention to.
Okay.
And also we schedule a touch base now with content authors for 2 hours after our demo, and we get to go in depth with them and really get to the bottom of like what the changes are and get feedback. And I think that feedback loop is really why we're on much better terms now. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, and I guess like that, like kind of like a governance question, really, maybe a little bit about how to manage, developing and deploying and the life cycle of those components, and then the changes that you make to help evolve them based on the feedback that you get. Yeah, that's great.
And what's really interesting in our space, I work for Principal.com, and we're really big in web components. And the Drupal backend, because we've implemented the form layer for all these web components, we're now being used as like static content delivery service for all these front-end apps. Mm-hmm. And now it's like the same authors are publishing, personalized content into authenticated apps, and it's all through the Drupal CMS, and it's very powerful what you're able to do. As soon as you create that form layer, it's a lot of value provided to the rest of the organization. Mm-hmm. So even though it's a React front end, because it's the web component architecture, and they got to have the exact matching, properties and the exact matching like content fields. They're just reusing all of our work and not having to do it again. So it's really exciting, like how that's kind of lining up. Like as soon as you switch to using web components, it actually locks in your back end, but makes it, as long as the front end is using the same web component library, it makes it very seamless to have the content authors be able to generate the data necessary to deliver those web components in a distributed app. It's pretty amazing. So I'm glad you're talking about content authors.
Great, thank you.
Kind of our bread and butter now.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, great. Great, yeah, it's glad to hear other people are thinking about it too. Yes, sorry, I saw a hand go up.
Sure. I think the mention of timeline was interesting to me, and it creates a little bit of a puzzle for us here at Princeton because we run a really large multi-site platform. If you were to put something like Webflow in front of our site owners, their heads would explode, right? That's obviously much more than they could handle or need. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for a Drupal CMS where they can get the drag and drop features that they are asking for, how much, I'm a design manager, right? So I always want new features in our platform, but I also don't want to build a bunch of things that are going to be more difficult for us to migrate and update do to the CMS. So I think we're in this like this bit of a puzzle space, how to keep making our site owners happy and our campus partners happy while we don't make our future look more difficult. You have an insight into that space?
Yeah, so I can repeat that real quick. I think the question was about like, what do you do while waiting for Experience Builder, basically? When you have demanding users, how do you tell them, just wait? And so I think I'm confident there will be people that are more qualified to answer that than me, but I'll give my take. I know that there are certain technologies that are already being used in Experience Builder that will be usable, that are usable today, that'll help prepare the sites. One example is, I think that a lot of the blocks will be based on single directory components. So ensuring that sort of, things that you're thinking about building as new features in the future are being architected so that they'll be ready for the future. And of course, there's no guarantee, but so I think that's definitely one place to look is what. The documentation is actually, so far, is really good about Experience Builder. It's all work in progress, but you can sort of glean what they're doing, what they're using in Drupal, and how to maybe start moving in that direction so that you can get there. I don't recall if Layout Builder will be an easy upgrade to Experience Builder. Maybe someone, no, I'm seeing head shakes.
Yeah, there was some promise about it being migratable, but
it is a completely different model, so it's not at all surprising.
If it's not, that's not.
So I think that's definitely one place, is just looking for ways to start embracing maybe some newer things in Drupal that are being embraced in Experience Builder that maybe you haven't started to embrace yet. And I mean, I think that playing with what's there today, I don't remember when the date for a beta is. It's alpha, I think alpha v4 just came out like yesterday, the day before. So it's still kind of early. The version that I was playing with broke a few times, and but once a beta comes out, hopefully then it'll be a little more stable and you can actually start playing with it, preparing for it, basically, figuring out how you can use it. But it is, as Alex was saying, it is very new still, and it will take probably a few years to really get to the point where it's really competing with anything else. I hope I'm wrong, but that certainly could be the case. So just starting to prepare, I guess, starting to get familiar with it. And if there are places where once it is out, if it's not quite there yet, you can even, as I said, start using it on some temporary sort of ephemeral websites or personal projects, that kind of thing. Small projects to get familiar with it. Maybe that would be my advice, but I don't know if anybody else has opinions on how to start planning for Experience Builder at this point. Are there any other questions? Oh, I think we're at time, so maybe. Yeah, thank you so much.